So many people they're forever looking outside themselves to others. Heal me, fix me, tell me what to do. If you just tell me what to do, I'll do that. I've had thousands of people over the years say, just give me a plan. I'm really good with a plan. I'll follow the plan. And that's my training. I can do that. But if I do that, it's just another diet, another set of rules that someone outside you is giving you. It usually won't foster lasting change because it hasn't come from this place inside you that cares so deeply for life.
That was Dr. Libby Weaver, and you're listening to The Regenerative Journey. From wherever we are, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, recognising their continuing connection to this land, its waterways, the stars in the skies since time immemorial. We pay our respects to the elders, knowledge holders, and to all the generations of First Nations peoples who have nurtured their unceded sovereign lands for over 80,000 years and continue to do so today.
G'day, I'm your host Charlie Arnott, an 8th generational Australian regenerative farmer. And in this podcast series, I'll be diving deep and exploring my guests' unique perspectives on the world so you can apply their experience and knowledge to cultivate your own transition to a more regenerative way of life.
Welcome to The Regenerative Journey with your host Charlie Arnott.
Welcome back to The Regenerative Journey. Welcome to this awesome interview with Libby Weaver. I've known Libby for some years now. She's actually come along to one of our biodynamic workshops some years ago, and she's probably given us the best testimonial ever to encourage people to get along. She said something along the lines of, every human needs to come to this workshop. I concur. I think it's a wonderful 2 days. Libby certainly enjoyed it. She is an amazing woman. She is, how do I even describe Libby? She's a holistic health practitioner, nutritionist. She works with not just the body, the mind. She's got some awesome training programs. She's written many, many books. She's an expert in in female hormonal principles and practices. She is, I have to say, one of Australia's leading experts and professionals in that space. And what a lovely human, and so generous in storytelling and the time she gave us. We just love her. It took some years of sort of toing and froing to actually coordinate the interview. She was at Hannaminno. We recorded it in our house there at Hannaminno. She was in the hood. She'd been invited to come along to an International Women's Day lunch that day, so in the morning. Luckily enough to sit down with her and have the chat about her life and how she got to be where she is at the moment. And so many things I could say about Libby, so many reference points, but you just have to listen. Don't press stop, don't press fast forward. Listen to this wonderful interview with Libby Weaver, Dr. Libby Weaver, on The Regenerative Journey. Okay, Libby Weaver, welcome to The Regenerative Journey.
Thank you, Charlie.
And welcome to our guest bedroom, where I have done a few interviews before, and looking out at our lovely dam at the homestead here at Hannaminno. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a joy to be here. Thank you so much.
We have, you arrived last night. You're on the way today, so we've got to be conscious of time. I think we've got plenty. To Crookwell.
Yes.
What are you doing over there again?
So it's International Women's Day, and the lovely people of Crookwell have invited me to speak to the Agricultural Women's Society over there about hormones. So, yeah, a GP in the area apparently recommended me and wants to elevate the conversation to better support women with particularly going through menopause. So very much looking forward to, being part of that lovely community today.
Was it an unusual request? Like, is that something you are... I know you do a lot of speaking, but a country town, Women's Day, was it like... I mean, I know it's your love and it's a thing that you're really passionate about. Were you pleasantly surprised
to be invited?
Very pleasantly surprised. It is work I adore. It doesn't happen enough, though, getting into those rural communities. It's a conversation, I think, or holistic health in general, helping people to understand that all the different things that contribute to our health. I think that conversation needs to be elevated in all communities. It's less common for an invitation like that to come from a rural town, but I grew up in Tamworth in country New South Wales, so any chance I get to be part of and contribute to a rural community, I love it.
We're going to get back to that. Now, this podcast won't come out before 5 o'clock this afternoon, so no spoiler alert there. Is there any sort of what's your message to them today? Do you think?
Essentially, firstly, that nutrition can play a really big role in how we feel and function each day. So my work has 3 pillars to it: the biochemical, the nutritional, and the emotional. So I usually begin a talk speaking about nutrition, and a simple message that I share is, for me, there's no such thing as junk food. There's just junk and there's food. And as humans, we're supposed to eat food. And I think a really big challenge for a lot of people with their health today, including women across the menopausal transition, is that the junk has just infiltrated. I know when I was growing up, we ate junk at birthday parties, but that was it. It wasn't in the house. Whereas now it's become part of what people do every day, and it's what we do every day that impacts on our health. It's not what we do occasionally. So that'll be part of the message. And then also I'll get into some real specifics with their chemistry. So here's what estrogen does, here's what progesterone does. Progesterone, for example, is a really powerful anti-anxiety agent, and I wish women of all ages knew that, because we only make a big surge of progesterone after ovulation. And so for young women, if they're having trouble with their periods, they might not be ovulating. For people with really bad PMT, and then, of course, in the lead up to menopause, ovulation ceases to be regular, so we stop making progesterone on a regular basis. The oral contraceptive pill suppresses ovulation. That's why it's so successful at preventing pregnancy. And again, I don't feel like enough women understand how the pill actually works. So you literally don't make progesterone, maybe a tiny amount from your adrenal glands when you're on the pill, and that can have big consequences later on.
I was listening to or watching something the other day, and it was fascinating. It made so much sense that when women are on the pill, obviously it's a hormone disrupting kind of a medication to prevent pregnancy, but it actually, if I want to understand, it actually changes the way that woman might see a man, like the sort of the relationship she wants to have, or even her attraction to a particular type of man. Mm. So then on the pill, going out and this guy's unreal, and then at whatever point maybe she goes off the pill, hormones get back to so-called normal and go, oh my God, who is this?
What am I doing with this person?
Who's this dickhead? I mean, that's fascinating.
Isn't it? Yeah, it changes so much of our chemical makeup. It changes our perception of pheromones. We know it has really distinct changes in the brain. Also, too, I think we mistakenly think that the pill helps with bone health, and it doesn't. The hormones in the pill are not identical to the hormones the body produces, and so they're not a replacement for that, and the type of estrogen is not conducive to good bone health. Your own estrogen is. So
no, not that I know a lot about the pill, but that's interesting about the bone stuff as well. Is that like is that like a selling point? It's like, and if you take the pill,
it used to be
really,
yeah, and also too for young women who, if women don't eat enough, if they over-exercise, they can lose their periods, and the solution was always, I will go on the pill, and then that'll bring your period back, and that'll help your bone health, and we now obviously understand that that's not how it's working.
Wow. Mm. Let's because this is about your regenerative journey, and I like to emphasise you're not a farmer. I will get to your farming experience though, which we were talking about last night over dinner. But I always like to emphasise that this podcast is not about necessarily farmers' regenerative journeys and growing better grass and cows and stuff, but everyone has a journey of regeneration. Somewhat, and I'm interested to know more about yours, of course. So tell me, where did life? We did get a bit of insight last night. Tamworth,
country New South Wales. Yes, grew up in town, and I struck the parent jackpot. They're beautiful human beings. My mum's just turned 80, Dad's 83, and so I grew up there very simply. We had chickens in the backyard. We grew quite a lot of our own vegetables. And so I grew up with parents speaking to me about, you eat an orange because it's rich in vitamin C and that helps you not get a cold. So they always sort of just spoke like that. It wasn't a sit-down lecture. So I had an awareness, I think, of nutrition from a pretty young age. My dad, in his heart, I think, really belonged on the land, and he used to plant wheat in the backyard every year so he could see. When I asked why he did it, he said, so I can see what the crops look like further west. I want to see what the wheat looks like this year.
So cute.
And he didn't really look at the soil. He was looking at mostly at rainfall. So he kept track of how many eggs the chickens laid every day. He had a calendar in his shed, and how much rain had fallen. And so he would then look at and he would keep the wheat heads for as long as they'd last before they'd fall apart, and look at the size of this, look at the colour, look at the grain formation. So he was really fascinated in linking that to the elements.
So correlating.
Well, he was trying to correlate rainfall, I think.
Wow.
And
wow.
So he just had a brain that thought like that, and I still love that about him to this day. And I feel a bit sad for him that he didn't ever get to truly farm, because he would have been brilliant at it, because he's such a great thinker. And so that was my upbringing. Mum gave me a diary when I was 4 years old, and the only things I ever wrote were how many eggs I collected. That was the most exciting thing in my day as a kid, because I loved the chickens, and but it also got me into the habit of writing each day. So I've had a journal pretty much every day. Not so much these days. Try to write books a bit more these days, but I've always kept a journal which is how I sort of uncovered what was really happening for me personally. But grew up there, loved it, and then went off to university in Newcastle and did journalism to start.
This is after you were a student at Peel High.
Yes.
Is it Peel High?
Peel High School. Good memory from
go.
our chat last night.
Peel River there.
Peel High School, yes, and that was the agricultural high school on the outskirts of town. And
was that near the hospital?
No.
Other
side of town.
Other side, right. Yeah, right.
And so, it was, I still have very dear friends in my life today who I went to school with. Then left for Newcastle, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I loved writing, so that's why I studied journalism to start with, but I stopped that very quickly. And then I loved human behaviour. So then I did psychology, but it turned out to be a lot of rats and statistics, which was not really what I had in mind. And then I realised that particularly at university you needed to be really good at self-directed learning. And so I studied nutrition and dietetics and loved it.
Uni?
Yeah, in Newcastle.
So you just step sideways to the new,
I did, yeah.
And why that? Like journalism, psychology, and I mean, I guess it's psychology and nutrition. I guess body function and so on. But what made you think that's what I want to learn? Was it your love of chickens, or and eggs and I don't know, or you
pretty much?
What was that?
I loved writing, but I wanted to write about human behaviour, but particularly human behaviour related to health. So I had a question in my mind: why do we do what we do, even though we know what we know? Because it's not a lack of education that leads anyone to polish off a packet of chocolate biscuits after dinner. No one does that thinking, I'm going to feel so fabulous after I eat all these bickies. Yeah. People do that not really knowing why they do that. So I was trying to, I guess, combine things that I loved, which was writing and understanding human behaviour, and then, of course, nutrition.
Was that a conscious thing? On reflection, was that why you did it? Or at the time did you go, wow, I love this, I love that, I'm going to combine it? Like, was it a natural progression? I'm just always fascinated with, how people decide, or often probably don't decide. They find themselves just in a situation which suits them, whether that's because the universe is on their side or they just, I don't know, coincidence. Like, was it a conscious thing?
Nutrition definitely was, because I read about it for pleasure. The other stuff I was really searching what I wanted to do, what I wanted to contribute. But as soon as when I reflected and thought, I've always read about nutrition for pleasure, it was not hard work. So that was a very conscious choice to go down that road. And then it's in hindsight that I can see, no wonder I was drawn to the journalism first, had a very different perception of journalism and what it entailed. I just thought it was writing about things that you cared about. So, and then obviously there's got psychology with the human behaviour. So then after nutrition and dietetics I learnt it in a very conventional dietetic nutrition-y sense. So we were taught the food pyramid and
the good old food.
Yeah. And I can remember, I took the grounding in science, nutrition science was terrific and how the body works, but I didn't ever gel with the dietetic side of things, which is nutrition. The nutrition they were talking about is the solution to particular conditions. And so when the pyramid was presented, I can remember very genuinely, I wasn't being a brat, but very genuinely asking my lecturer about, for example, 3 serves of dairy products in the middle of that pyramid. And I remember saying, it's really well documented in lots of journals that the majority of the Asian population can't digest dairy products because they've not grown up with it. They don't have the enzymes for it. So how on earth are we being taught that that's the way that everybody needs to eat? And there were no real answers to that. And I also noticed we were very much taught the calorie equation. So your body shape and size was a reflection of how much you ate versus how much you moved. And I would do experiments on myself and it didn't work. And I remember going to one of my lecturers and saying, it just doesn't apply. It doesn't seem to matter what happens with my weight, whether I restrict calories, eat more calories, eat exactly what the equation tells me I'm supposed to eat. And their response was, well, you mustn't be doing it properly. And I was, because I was absolute goody two-shoes at that point in my life.
You were a nuisance by the sounds of it.
I was.
Right?
It was such a pest.
Really?
But I had that brain going, there's something more going on here. And I eventually went back to geeky biochemistry textbooks with the question in my mind, what leads the human body to get the message that it needs to burn fat and what leads the body to get the message that it needs to store fat? And I put my answers into the first book I wrote, which was called Accidentally Overweight. And it explains things like insulin resistance, and when our thyroid's not working properly, it looks at the gut microbiome. And yeah, anyway, that's a whole other part of the journey.
Well, no, but that's interesting. So there was science backing up your kind of intuition, but that wasn't. It sounds like that wasn't the stuff that they were considering or referencing in your course, though, right?
No, that's right. There was no consideration of the metabolic consequences of the food that we were consuming. So are you getting 1,000 calories from a head of broccoli or from a beautiful piece of steak, or are you getting 1,000 calories from a packet of lollies? There was no consideration of what hormones do you then produce after you consume those things, and so therefore that's going to influence what those calories, what that energy does.
So they were just simplifying your whole equation and looking at calories as the measure of energy, I guess, regardless of the source.
Exactly. And I think
that's pretty critical.
Isn't it?
Consideration.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not uncommon, I guess. Pick a field of endeavour, and I guess there's that kind of mainstream thinking or conventional thinking versus not alternative, but actually, it is an alternative, but it's actually a lot of those things, and again, in this case, it's grounded in science. It's like they just choose not to because it's too complicated. It doesn't fit with our food pyramid. I posted the other day, South Park, the guys who did South Park posted a great, I don't know how old it was, and it was basically this little skit about turning the food pyramid upside down.
I've seen it.
Have you seen that one?
Yes.
It's a classic, isn't it? It's so good.
Yes.
Yeah, put grains on grains stay on the bottom, but it's the
tiny
end of the thing,
yep.
yeah, and the other way around. Just how they framed it up. So let's talk about the food pyramid while we're on it. We'll get back to chronological order, but what is not so good about the conventional thinking or the structure of the food pyramid?
Firstly, I just don't think there's one way that we're all supposed to eat. I think that we need to consider bio-individuality. Part of that is related to our heritage. So where have you come from? What foods of your people, what did you evolve eating? Or what food did your people evolve eating? I think that that's a really important consideration. I also think that for a lot of people, we're learning that grains don't support their health, whereas for others, other people, they'll say, no, I feel incredibly energised and well supported when I consume grains. So it's more, I think, that there can be, depending on the person, but there can be very nutritious food sources within some of the blocks of the food pyramid, but there are really lousy sources within that as well. So if you're going to eat white bread from the supermarket, it's going to have a very different effect than if you get some barley that someone's lovingly grown and you pop that into a soup or a stew or a casserole. So I think too that Asian cultures obviously have evolved using rice as a grain, so it clearly it serves their gut microbiome. There might be someone who hasn't grown up in that culture for whom rice gives them lots of flatulence, makes them really bloated. So I think it's about understanding how your own body responds, and the food pyramid has no allowance for that. It's just, this is how you're supposed to eat.
Yeah, so culturally we need to factor, that's a variable.
Very much so. Yeah. Our gut microbiome is hugely, so part of my PhD was actually, I received, we'll get to that in a minute, but I received faeces samples from the children who were in my study, and my job was to plate their faeces samples so that I could actually see, back then we called it their gut bacteria profile. The word gut microbiome didn't exist back then when I was doing my PhD. So, but there's no question we have a much better understanding now of the gut microbiome. I still think it's tiny, but that's going to play a big role as well in the food that serves us. I think too that in our heart of hearts we all have things that we deeply care about and that are important to us. So, for example, when I was still seeing patients, if someone was vegan or vegetarian, I would dive into exploring with them why they'd chosen that. And it was really clear some people would choose that path because of a belief that they had established that was the best way they could care for animals, and others had chosen that path because they were terrified of food, they were terrified of meat. They used to say, if I eat flesh, I'll gain flesh. So it was a real fear of gaining weight. Now, it's not, I didn't ever see it as my job to address the way that they were eating, although I have a very different stance on that now. This is 25 years ago. But back then I would just make sure that they were getting all of their nutrients covered, because you can't, when you eat in a vegan way, you literally can't eat enough iron, zinc, B12. It's very hard to get enough calcium. Choline is incredible. It's not a nutrient, but it's not a vitamin, but it should be. It's really crucial for our brain function. Vitamin A. So there are so many nutrients that it's way too easy to miss out on unless you really know what you're doing when you eat that way. So I feel that for some people they almost have a calling in their heart to eat in a certain way, but I would try to work out, is it fear-based or is that a genuine thing for you? And I think a lot of people have been really misguided with a lot of the information that's out there these days around that stuff.
I guess is there a difference between belief, like external belief system imposed on them or they've exposed to, versus intuition?
Exactly, and how I think only an individual can discern that, and I think it's tricky even for an individual these days, especially to discern that because of all sorts of cultural messages in the media that are being thrown at people that can lead them to be misinformed.
And in turning the food pyramid upside down, fats and not protein. What's at the top? I remember reading that cartoon. I guess it says fats, animal fats. Is it up at the top? Which is when you turn it upside down is the big.
Meat. Isn't meat second?
I can't remember. I guess there's probably different versions of it too. But I guess the point being that in turning it upside down, the larger majority of diet, if that's sort of the way we break it into proportions, is animal products, right?
Yes.
Meat and fats at least, yeah. But animal fats, not plant fats or plant oils, that sort of thing.
So I feel olive oil, I think, has a really great place in our kitchens. When we eat,
it does in ours, having an Italian wife.
Yes, how delicious!
And you feel free to nibble on that olive.
Beautifully placed there on the desk.
Olive oil, yeah, definitely big one.
And I think avocados are a beautiful thing to include in how we eat. It's almost as if, because fat in its entirety was vilified for such a long time, so people were really frightened of eating fat. I used to back in the low-fat era, when I was trying to encourage people to eat more fat in general, I used to get them to imagine eating full-fat yogurt, because back then, when the low-fat era was in, people didn't eat full-fat yogurt. And I'd say, imagine what we now call a Greek-style yogurt. Put that in your mouth and tell me what that's like. And they'd say, oh, it's really rich, it's really creamy. And I'd say, and how much are you going to have? Oh, well, just 2 spoons and I'm really satisfied, because I was trying to demonstrate the satiety aspect of eating fat. And then I'd say, okay, now imagine having a low-fat yogurt that's been sweetened with some strawberries. Tell me about that. It's really watery, it's really sweet. Okay, how much of that are you going to have? Oh, the whole pot every time. So I was trying to help people see that it's very easy to overeat. It's very easy to eat just way too much total food when there's no fat present. And so, of course, what we've seen, nutrition information moves in about 30-year cycles, and that low-fat era went out of fashion, and we saw the reinvigoration of high-protein diets. So Atkins, which was around in the 70s, that came back into fashion. Paleo came to be, and so people then were still a bit confused about fat, but they were now really focusing on eating enough protein, and the carbs had dropped back. And then from there, obviously, we've moved on to keto is really popular now, obviously, and that big focus is on making sure you're having enough fat and getting the carbs super, super low. In all of these ways of eating, all of it is eating what I call food, which in the Western world right now we call whole real food. But it's just food, and as a human species, it's all we've ever eaten until the very, very, very recent past in our evolution, when the junk infiltrated. So I don't have a way that I don't tell everyone to be keto or paleo or high protein and low carb. I think you can find your own way with that. My focus is on eat food, and for some people, they feel fantastic eating bucket loads of meat and bucket loads of fat and wowing back on a lot of other things, whereas for others, they don't feel great eating that way. So flip it, include your meat, include your fats, but have plenty of vegetables, have plenty of fruit, include some brown rice and some quinoa, and thrive on what feels good for you. So,
I mean, one theme that is pretty clear to me, and again, watching the people and the channels I do, not TV channels, but the social media channels, I guess, is the theme. It's, as you say, it doesn't seem to be so much carnivore versus keto versus, any pick one of those, Atkins, whatever. It's the theme, and the results seem to come from the removal of processed food.
Yes.
Because that's ultimately what people do. Where pick a diet, they don't tend to have the processed white bread. They might have sourdough as a change of diet, or I don't know, you pick a diet and there's changes, but the removal of processed food seems to be the biggest game changer.
Well, you're not going to the petrol station at midnight to get a chocolate bar if you're following keto or fasting.
Or a chocolate milk.
No. Oh, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, that's right. So the white foods,
that's it.
The processed white foods, that sort of thing.
So I do think sometimes we attribute feeling better when we start to follow a particular way of eating. I think it's easy to attribute it to that, rather than see, well, I'm now not eating all these other things that were potentially taking away from my health and energy, my gut health, my brain function, my ability to even regulate my mood. We focus on, I'm eating in this particular way, it must be that, rather than all these things I've let go of. I'm not saying for a second that eating in a particular way isn't great. It can be fantastic and transformative for a lot of people. But I think remember that when you eat in a particular way following a diet, like a keto or a fasting, you're not having lollies.
And that is, each their own, isn't it?
Exactly.
Whatever feels good, whatever they innately, makes them feel good, is as important. And even that feeling or having the confidence of going, actually, I'm really happy with this. I've got access to that sort of food. The preparation sort of is easy, or it meets my kind of, the gear I've got, like so many different other things. and variables for an individual might make that one just suitable.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And exactly. Yeah. And I think too, recognising, you touched on it just now, we're really privileged to have choice, aren't we? It's not like we're wondering where the next meal is coming from. We're really privileged to sit at a table together. I had the privilege of dining with you and your family last night, and to give thanks for the animal that you'd raised with such consideration for the animal itself and the planet and the land and the tenderness that you and your family have put into this beautiful home and the food that then comes from it. To acknowledge that and recognise that before you eat and say thanks is a real privilege. It was certainly a highlight of my day yesterday, Charlie. Thank you.
Well, we do play a little game. What was my favourite part of today? And Libby kicked it off, put her on the spot, and that was lovely. And it was great. And that's kind of normal for us, I guess, because that's the way we operate. But it's lovely to have that reminder that of the importance of that, especially for kids too. Like I grew up, dare I say, in the same house, but in a different room of the house, in the TV room, for dinner every day. Like we sat and had lunch and breakfast out in the kitchen.
Yep.
But dinner was, without fail, in front of the TV, crouching over a very delicious dinner that Mum would make, but it was watching TV. And that changes everything. No talking, you're absorbing all the rubbish on the TV. And it would always cause a fight because my brother and I would have to fight who would be not sit nearest the TV. That was the worst spot to sit because then you had to change the channel manually because there's no remotes back then. Of course. So, the setting of that and the reverence and grace involved is really important. Let's get back to a lovely little off-ramp there. Tell me, nutrition, Newcastle Uni, finding your way through that, enjoying that course, no doubt. What happened next?
So at the end of my fourth year, they send you out on a prac, and my last one was at Tamworth Base Hospital, so it was lovely to go back to where I'd grown up. And for the last couple of weeks there, my supervisor said, I'm happy with where you're at, you can run the outpatient clinic. So the people coming in weren't super unwell, but they were coming in because they'd been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, more lifestyle type conditions, and they were needing nutrition support for those. So she very kindly and trustingly allowed me to do that. And
age what were you?
At this point, 24.
Wow, cool. And
she, but obviously I could go to her if I had anything tricky, but across that time, I had 3 children come to see me with very different health conditions, and they were children who'd had a lot of medical attention prior to going down a nutrition road. And what the dietary changes I encouraged their mother and father to make with the child fixed all 3 of them, but they all had very different things happening. And I couldn't understand how there I was as still a nutrition student at the end of my degree. How am I sitting there working, like being able to guide them with that and getting an outcome when they've had lots of medical attention? Why was this not thought of originally? Why was nutrition not one of the first things that was thought of to help these children? And so I rang the man who'd been my immunology professor, and he wouldn't have remembered me from a bar of soap. I was one of 500 or 600 people in his immunology lectures in the 3rd year of my degree. But I phoned him and I said, this is who I am, this is what I'm seeing, I don't understand. And I said to him what I just said to you. And he said, why don't you do a PhD? You've got a really curious mind. And I said, oh, no, I'm no good at science. I'm a people person. No, I'm terrible at science. I won't be able to do it. And he just said, no, you can learn the science, but you've got enough curiosity. All you need for a PhD is curiosity and a question. So to cut a very long story short, I decided to do a PhD. And I was originally looking at children with constipation, and I was doing some work with a paediatric gastroenterologist at one of the big teaching hospitals in Newcastle, and changing children's diet, and dietary change was actually helping them to not have parts of their bowel removed. So they had such severe constipation, there was compaction, laxatives wouldn't work. And then obviously 5, 6, Oof. Yeah. And so surgery was the last option, but they were at that point because the bowel compaction was so severe. And through certain dietary changes, we were getting kids off the surgical list. It didn't work with all children, but it worked for the majority. And so I was in this environment of dietary change can have a truly profound effect on so much, but particularly obviously on our gut. And so I was sort of in that researchy sort of world. But then the reason I'd rung my immunology professor was because during the year that we do immunology as part of nutrition and dietetics, he'd brought in a guest lecturer, and his name was Dr. Merv Garrett. And he actually used to have a farm at Cowra. He's passed away now, but yeah, he was off a farm at Cowra. And so he was an allergist, so a medical doctor who'd gone on and done his specialty training in allergies, in allergic medicine. And he was brought in as a guest lecturer for us in our third year of immunology. And I didn't have a history of allergy personally. There was no allergies in my family. So other than it being what was supposed to unfold, I didn't really understand why I felt so connected to this man and his message and what he was sharing. And I spoke to him afterwards, and he was talking about childhood eczema. He was talking about asthma and the way dietary change can have a really significant impact to the point of, in some cases, resolving those things. And so when I went back to do my PhD working with children, I reconnected with Dr. Merv Garrett and in his allergy practice, and I became his nutritionist. And so I got to sit in on his all of his clients for 2 years. Wow. And I learnt more sitting in with him. I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you now if I hadn't had that experience. I learnt so much from him because he combined his farming with his medicine. So he was teaching me, for when a lamb's being born and it's stuck, it can be a magnesium deficiency. So get the magnesium in. This is how you tell, these are the symptoms that your animals will give you if there's no selenium. So we've got to sort that out. These are the consequences of that. So he had this wonderful knowledge of caring for his animals from his farming perspective that he would then bring, it doesn't all match up, but he would bring those considerations into his medical practice. So he was such a brilliant man, and a man way ahead of his time. And he used to fly his plane. He used to fly a little tiny plane from his farm out here to go and tend to sick people in remote places, and just a brilliant human being. Anyway, so I started down the road of this PhD, and he was one of my supervisors and 2 others who were based at the university. And I was looking at, the bowel compaction with the children and not getting anywhere. They wouldn't give me ethics approval to do it, which I don't understand why. But anyway, that was just what was unfolding.
Being a nuisance again.
Yes, poking the bear. Yeah. And then one of my girlfriends, who'd a very dear friend of mine, and we'd been flatmates through our early part of university, she went on to become an art teacher. And so she used to say to me, I don't read, I just look at pictures. You're the reader. And one day she sent me a clipping she'd moved to Melbourne, she sent me a clipping out of the Melbourne Age. And I knew she wouldn't have read the article because she was self-declared I don't read. But she said, I thought you needed to see this heading. And the heading said, milk linked to brain disorders. And we used to have a turn of phrase where when we were at uni together, if I liked a boy and he didn't like me back, she just used to say, oh, don't worry about him, he's got a brain disorder. It was sort of her little response to me. Yeah. And so here's this heading in the Melbourne Age, milk linked to brain disorders, and she just wrote me a note saying, this must have been what was wrong with all the boys who never liked you.
I drank too much milk.
But it was actually so of course I read the article, and it was actually the work of a man called Professor Robert Cade, who he had found in his research, he'd found fragments of gluten and casein in the spinal fluid of adults with schizophrenia and children with autism. And I went running into my professor and I said, I don't really know what this is, but this is why I haven't got ethics approval for the other study. I want to look at this. And so I ended up doing my PhD working with children with autism, and received blood, urine and faeces samples from them. And I was looking at changes in what was happening with their urinary amino acids that they were excreting to do with connective tissue. I was looking at, as I said, we talked about, it wasn't called the gut microbiome back then, their gut bacteria profiles. I was looking at the makeup of that and the influence of what the children were eating on their gut microbiome. We're looking at different fatty acids in their blood. So it was very much a biochemical, microbiological, immunological and nutritional approach to children who'd been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And so I did a lot of work with those kids and their families back then. And so I didn't ever, I was working, I didn't ever call myself a dietitian, but that's what I was essentially qualified as. But when the children would come to see me for nutrition, their parents were bringing them because they might have had severe constipation or severe diarrhea or reflux. So I was literally just encouraging them to make dietary changes to address those symptoms. But the first child I ever did this work with, he was 4 years old, he was nonverbal, and he was very tiny. He wasn't growing well enough, but he was drinking 4 litres of cow's milk a day, and he wouldn't eat. He would only drink milk. And he had a history of chronic ear infections, some tonsillitis, but mostly ear infections. He'd had 22 rounds of antibiotics before he was 2 years old, trying to deal with his ear infections. So we knew his gut would, be pretty challenged. Anyway, I said to the mother, we've got to get him eating more food, and he's not going to do that while he's having all of that milk. Let's switch him, let's get him onto rice milk for a period to see what happens to his diet, to see if he'll start eating other food, to see what happens to the recurrent ear infections. And 4 days after she made that change, she phoned me in tears saying he's just picked up a little stool, a little chair he sits on, and said, "Mummy, my chair." Oof. So there was no baby talk. He just spoke, and he'd never said a word. Now, that kind of change didn't happen for all the children, but that was the first child I ever worked with, and I just don't feel like I would have had that experience if there was nothing in it. And
yeah, there's something in there, isn't there?
So it led me down a road of a PhD that was, they were my greatest teachers, and I get shaky now even talking about it. It was such a privilege to work with those kids and those families and to see the difference that could happen with their quality of life when they had no language, they couldn't toilet train, and to see them be able to learn some of those things was pretty breathtaking.
So what, in that case, obviously there was a change, dairy milk to rice milk, significant change. Like, did you work out what the biochemistry was, or the metabolistic, if that's the word? Like, what happened there?
So we
and also the fact that, was this like almost like a self-sabotaging? Like, if he only drank milk, the milk was what may have been, keeping him in that loop of ear infection or whatever. Like, that's interesting in itself. That the child's intuition was obviously so out of whack that it couldn't go, not that it's going to say, hey, I need some rice milk, but like try something else to try and break that pattern. So what actually happened? What was happening?
Yeah, so such a great question, Charlie, because it's so in our brain we have what are called opioid receptors, and it's how, as humans, we experience pain and pleasure. We have our own opioid system inside of us. So we if you go for a walk and see a beautiful sunset, or if you exercise, you make endorphins, and those endorphins bind to the opioid receptors in our brain, and they give us a little lift. So we now understand that there are fragments of food that, if a lot of things have got to go wrong for this to happen, and I'll explain that in a second, but there are foods that, if they're not properly digested, can form fragments that look like opioids. So obviously heroin's an opioid, morphine's an opioid. We feel good when we have those things. So Not that I've had experience in that.
I was going to say,
I'm not that much of a brat.
That's our like adults only podcast.
Regen.
Degenerative journey.
I'm happy with I'm happy with the endorphin rush I get from a sunset.
You've read about those effects.
Apparently, that's what happens. So yes, there are two foods. Gluten, if it's not properly broken down, can form an opioid-like compound, and beta-casomorphine can be formed from casein. So if you're not breaking those proteins down properly into single or double amino, so a protein, I'm sure your listeners know this, but just so we're all on the same page, proteins are made up of a string of amino acids, and when we chew our steak, when we chew something that's really rich in protein, our teeth begin that process of breaking the proteins down into amino acids, and obviously stomach acid really kicks in and begins to do that work, and then the food continues on its journey. And so the amino acids that we're extracting from our protein rich foods ideally become 1, 2, 3, 4 amino acids in a string, whereas these morphine-like compounds are about 7 amino acids in length. They're too long, they're not properly broken down. So that's happening. And then also we want to have good gut integrity, so we only want to be absorbing nutrients out of our food. So we want things like vitamin C and zinc to move from our digestive system across into our blood. We don't want fragments of food, even though they're microscopic, we don't want fragments of food to move from the gut into the blood. But so if we have increased gut permeability, which has become known as leaky gut, if that's happening, these fragments of food can get out into the blood. And we used to think the blood-brain barrier was highly selective as to what it allowed to cross over into it, and we now know that that's not the case. And these fragments of food can actually get across that blood-brain barrier. They have an opioid structure, so they can bind to the opioid receptors in our brain, and they give us a little lift, which is why the kids seek it out. So
that's why the milk was just a perpetuating cycle.
It was, yeah. They need it to.
He couldn't help that.
No, it's almost like an addiction. And so it's I think a huge amount of research needs to be done in this area, even to look at obesity, to look at essentially food addiction, because there's a lot we can do to correct our gut health to stop it from happening. However, I think it's probably happening in a lot of people right now. So it's essentially the beta-casomorphine is binding to the opioid receptors in the brain, and it gives us a lift. So it's not a lift. If an adult experiences it, it's not a lift like I want to go out and have a great party. If someone like me says to them, I'll pick on gluten, for example, I need you to take a break from gluten to see if it's going to make a difference to your symptoms, they want to punch me in the face. They wish they'd never met me. It's like, don't tell me to give that up. Yeah. They love it more than just, it's a food that I eat. They're hooked on it. Mm.
Isn't it fascinating? And also, I guess, sitting beside that is the fascinating concept of the gut flora and the actual bacteria, and I think bacteria and fungus and whatever else, but those creatures somehow, and maybe it's sitting beside this process you just mentioned there, like almost sending messages to the brain going, eat more bread, like like yeast in the gut, and then it's like this again. It's like, I need to stay in here, so I'm going to tell the brain to eat more of the stuff I like digesting, so I can actually increase my population. Mm. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Isn't it? And
we're run by other creatures.
We are. I actually, what I'm about to say, I don't have solid scientific grounding for. It's a theory. I preface it with that. So I was obsessed with Streptococcus because it was the type of infective organism that's the infection that creates ear infections. It's the bacteria that creates tonsillitis. So and when you read about Streptococcus, it is obviously a species that's in our ears, noses and throats. And when you read microbiology textbooks, they say that it's okay if Streptococcus is less than 5% of the aerobic flora in our gut. I wasn't happy with that. I felt like it was a bit of a cop-out. I felt like strep really is not supposed to be in our gut, but the books say that if it's under 5%, it was okay. And when I was doing my PhD, for a lot of the children with autism, more than 90% of their aerobic flora was Streptococcus. So I was really obsessed with that. And so it led me to go, how did it end up in there? And this will sort of take us on a journey, I think, that these concepts can help people just in general with their health. So if we've got a head full of Streptococcus, and let's say we get a cold or tonsillitis, even as adults, we're not good at coughing up mucus. We tend to swallow, and children are terrible at it. They swallow so much mucus. But even as adults, we do. But when we swallow that bolus of mucus, our stomach acid is supposed to be super acidic, that it sterilises what we swallow. So if we're swallowing bugs, the pH of the stomach acid is supposed to be about 1.9, which is, just like carboxylic acid, really, really, really acidic. So it should kill what you've just swallowed. But one of my theories, and there's a few researchers who have looked at this, if your stomach acid is not acidic enough, so it might be sitting at a pH of 4, it's still acidic, but not acidic enough to do the killing kind of work, then that whatever you've swallowed, in this case Streptococcus, is going to get through there and it can then colonise the large intestine. But because strep is a lactic acid producing bacteria, so it makes its own acid, it changes the pH of that local environment, and our whole digestive system is run off a pH gradient, so that if the pH of the environment where the strep builds its houses and it produces a lot of acid, that environment then becomes inhospitable because of the pH to other bugs that would be far more beneficial. So it crowds them out because it makes the environment suit itself. And I feel like that contributes to this self-perpetuating cycle that you mentioned.
Fascinating, isn't it? So much. So much. It's so involved.
And totally spins my tyres.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I love it too. And the more I learn, the more fascinated it becomes. But I guess it could also be a source of confusion.
Yeah, of course.
People going, look, I know I've got a gut thing, but where do I start? What is it? What test do I need? And even within the range of gastroenterologists in their traditional sense, but also others that are on the sidelines looking in, going, having different theories and views as well. It can be really confusing for people to go, where do I start? So where do people start? Where should they start when they're going, I'm pretty sure I've got a gut problem? I mean, is it fair to say that general illness, can kind of be tracked back to the gut?
Yes.
Yeah. So pick a disease, probably going to be something to do with what's going on in your gut.
Yes,
yeah, okay.
Definitely.
So pretty important organ.
Yeah, crucial.
Or function.
Yes.
So where would you suggest people start then? Like if they go, I feel crap.
Yeah, so firstly, our relationship with I call the body an earth suit. I feel like we want to look after it because it's how we actually get to be here. It's almost like a vehicle through which we get to experience this extraordinary world and have senses. And so when we shift our relationship with our body to appreciate it, because I think a lot of people feel like their body betrays them, it's against them. It's a great privilege, I think, to get a body and to get to be here. So our body is a vehicle of communication. It offers us a huge amount of information if we can tune in and listen to it and decipher what it's letting us know. And I feel that for a lot of us, we've lost touch with all of that information that's on offer. And yes, it takes practice and it takes a commitment to want to understand it. But there's a voice inside of us that has our back. There's a voice inside you that knows the best thing for you to eat for lunch, that knows when it's time for you to go to bed, that knows that the headache you get in the middle of the afternoon is not a deficiency of painkillers, even though that might be how you treat it. It's because you're dehydrated or your thoughts you're unaware of. All of us are unaware of most of the things that we think. So, but is it a call for you to check in with your thoughts? Is it related to an excessive amount of estrogen, which is connected to your liver, which is connected to your gut? So I know that's all very detailed and it sounds like you need sort of an expert to decipher that. But my point initially is, firstly, check in with yourself, because there's that voice in you that has your back and that is so busting to guide you and have you trust it again, because you were born trusting it and you were born listening to it, and that all gets interrupted. So you can get that back. So that would be the first thing I'd say, and the reason I say that first is because I think so many people they're forever looking outside themselves to others. Heal me, fix me, tell me what to do. If you just tell me what to do, I'll do that. I've had thousands of people over the years say, just give me a plan. I'm really good with a plan. I'll follow the plan. And that's my training. I can do that. But if I do that, it's just another diet, another set of rules that someone outside you is giving you. It usually won't foster lasting change because it hasn't come from this place inside you that cares so deeply for life and the fact that you get to be here. So that's the ultimate. It's almost like that's what I'm hoping people can reconnect with. However, in saying that, I understand we sometimes do need input because it's complicated or because we've been disconnected from what's going. We might have had gut problems for 40 years and we've not found solutions.
So ingrained in
exactly.
there, whatever. Yeah.
So yes, of course, seek help. The next thing I would say is anyone you seek help from, you want to understand, do they believe that they can help you? Do they believe in your capacity to heal? I think the practitioner's role in someone healing and their health improving is their belief is very important, as well as the patient's. You need to believe for yourself and not just pay lip service to it, but believe yourself that you can heal from something. And then, of course, I get really sciencey. So I would then try to help someone understand, well, if you're eating a lot of foods with preservatives in it, preservatives are in wine and dip and dried fruit to extend shelf life, not to help human health. The way they extend shelf life is they prevent the growth of bacteria. But your gut is full of bacteria that you need for great health and for your happiness and for great energy and for a great immune system. And so even just by including preservatives, you can be damaging your gut microbiome. So a really simple step is get preservative-free versions of all of those things if you want those in your life. And we're privileged in the West now that we can do that. You can get preservative-free all those things. It's just reading a label and getting used to that new version of the hummus you want to buy, for example.
And this is, sorry to interrupt, but just quickly, just to clarify, this is again a step, and it doesn't cost you anything. Like you're not lining up for an appointment with you or someone else. This is just like, oh shit, maybe I should look at that.
Exactly.
Cut the numbers out.
That's right.
And the colours.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's a really great first step when. And again, we're all starting from a different place. So if you're living on a lot of I'm sort of speaking from a place of if you're living on a lot of packet food, and you have gut troubles and you don't know where to start, that's a really great first step. Get rid of all the numbers, get rid of the preservatives. Then start to think, okay, how can I eat less stuff out of packets? How can I come back and start to eat mostly food rather than junk? And for some people, that shift alone is all they need to heal a challenged gut. We've made it. I'm not saying for a second there aren't some people who need a lot more detailed help, but I feel I've met a lot of people who they don't want to do the basics. They want pills and potions and complicated things when let's start with the basics and let's give the gut what we know it has the equipment to actually digest, which is food, not junk.
It's a bit like probably the 80-20, isn't it? Like, 20% of the action or the change can initiate can prompt the 80% of change, in the outcome. Yeah, I mean I'm generalising a bit, but like short, sharp changes will probably have the largest for those who have a general malaise or feeling like they want to. That's fascinating what you said about those steps and intuition and then belief and then sort of practice, or I said science there, because that is absolutely, I don't know why I haven't thought of it before, I've taken to have this conversation, Libby, to like in farming it's no different. Like you can't have practice change and because our bodies, a lot of people say, and I tend to believe them, that their property is a reflection of them. How it looks, the health of the property, the infrastructure, the whatever else. It's a reflection of, because it's where you live, it's where you work, it's your canvas, for activity and business and whatever. And when it is, however, noted or prompted that it needs help, having an intuition about that is a first step. Like going, I don't think that paddock's well. I don't think those cows are well. Apart from dead cow or whatever else, soil tests. And then the belief is really important too, isn't it? Having that intention of believing in yourself you can do it, believing that it can be done, and then I guess that third step of, call it science or practice or adaptation, not adoption. You were saying about, there's no formula for health, whether it be diet or other interventions. It's not one model fits all. So, and that's what we say is gather the information and then adapt it to you that fits your beliefs, fits your resources, fits your intuitively how it feels. It's fascinating. I mean, it doesn't. It's obvious because all these things are the same. It's apply it in your personal life, your health, your farm health. That's great. I like that sort of step by step. That's a really neat way to.
But I think so often, Charlie, we go out first. Just tell me what to do.
Outsource.
Yeah. And I'm not denying the value of that. I did a beautiful soil course with you and Hamish a couple of years ago and learnt so much, and I couldn't have intuited that information. I wanted to learn that information. But my intuition led me there because it's clear to me from a nutrition perspective, and obviously this is so well talked about now, that all health begins with the soil. Everything begins with the soil. And I did a cookbook, my first cookbook back in 2010, and dedicated that cookbook to the farmers who care, because it's so clear that if farmers stop caring, the entire world is going to fall apart. So it's and I agree though, it is the same, that farming method that you just shared and the way we approach human health. It's there's beautiful parallels.
You gave us our best testimonial ever when at that. You said you said other lovely things. You said every human must do this course, and that was wonderful to hear, because I hold you in high regard, and and you're not farming, which is the other interesting thing, or you are in some ways, but. And your appreciation of that, but it wasn't as though you went there going, I'm going to now apply this to my 5,000 acres or something. You went there as a human who had the intuition to go and wanted to learn, and in your field is, I understand how important it is. But when you said that, it was wonderful, because that's how we feel about it, And Hamish, as you know, is a freak. Like, he's just incredible. As I've said many times, maybe not so much on podcasts, is like, he's actually 110. But the biodynamics makes him look like he's 75.
What a gift.
He listens to this.
What a gift. That'll get everyone into it now, Charlie.
He's so old, that bloke, but he looks 75. So let's get back on. I'm just conscious of time as well. I think we're doing okay. How's your pulse? You're okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
What I don't have is any water.
Don't need it. Can I just sort of throw something in here you helped organise a really special event I attended at Brunswick Heads a couple of years ago now with Uncle Bruce Pascoe, and it was not long after the fires had gone through his property, and he was talking about how certain seeds need fire to germinate, and that some of the native grasses that had come back on his property hadn't been there for a really long time, and they'd then brought marsupials back to his place that hadn't been there for a while. And I felt that was a really beautiful, little touch on cycles that we so often don't reflect on. So the bushfires, yes, can be horrifically destructive to people's property and treasures, and sadly to human life at times, and animals' lives as well. And yet he was also able to articulate the gift in the fire and the importance of fire. And as humans, we're so often so black and white, aren't we? This is good, this is bad. And yet look at the purpose of some of these things if we choose to see it that way. And I felt like he's communicated that beautifully, and you're a big part of that event. And yeah, it was a terrific occasion. He's a lovely bloke, isn't he, Bruce? I know he has his critics as well, but I just love the way that he frames it. And it is a great point. It was funny, I was reading this morning in the book, The Obstacle is the Way, Ryan Halliday, and that particular chapter I was reading was exactly that. There's
there's the thing that happened, and then there's our perception, and it's it's very Viktor Frankl and so on, and just the way that there's the objective and the subjective. There's the objective fact that a bushfire went through, and then there's our perspective on it. And Tony Robbo, we're talking about our mate Robbo this morning. Tone stuff. And I remember a story he tells of, I think it's true. It might have been just sort of an analogy, but it was of twins who went away to war, and they came back from war, and one might have been Vietnam specifically, and one came back, and he was so bitter and twisted about life, and understandably, this is not being critical of either side there, but so bitter and twisted, and bloody what we had to do, and it all sucked, and I PTSD and whatever. That's sort of a whole different thing. And then the other twin came back and said, "Wow, I'm so appreciative of what I've come back to. I'm not being shot at. I've got food. I've got a roof. And they're exactly the same experiences." Kind of the same genetics, well, the same genetics, and it's all to do with perception. And I really, I keep referring to that, but yeah, absolutely right. Bruce's perception and the way he dealt with it, and the way he, I guess grieved somewhat, but then it opened up the opportunity, that's life, isn't it? Like growth happens in the valleys, in the dips, not the tops of the hills. It's those challenging moments that actually where we learn, and dead set, fires are horrible, but look what they've done. And the Australian bush, it's a necessity. It's just that we as humans have put houses in those scenarios.
That's right.
And swimming pools without pumps next to them, so we actually keep our houses, from getting trashed. And it's on the back of all that too, there was some interesting conversations with people like Peter Andrews and Stuart Andrews and Hamish Mackay as well about what to do next, and that's native vegetation generally. And then if you include, some of Zach's theories about glyphosate in those environments and what that has actually done to the soil and the vegetation, and created another variable and that was somewhat responsible. It actually created a situation which was a tinderbox kind of thing, and soil burning. That sort of stuff. Anyway, the Andrews men would say the best thing to do to restore that landscape is fly over a whole lot of blackberry seed, a whole lot of lantana seed, and whatever vegetation, like pioneering species, to get ground cover, to start improving that soil, get some greenery, get some biology in there. That's the best thing, because it was so, like 12 months, some of that, before any life came back to some of those places. But it's all about perspective. Like someone would go, that's blasphemous, but it's like, okay, what are we looking for? We're trying to heal this landscape.
Yeah.
We've got to put it in intensive care.
Yeah.
You've got to do some pretty drastic things,
Yeah.
So it's about long-term thinking.
It is.
Because as those landscapes, succession takes place, those blackberries will disappear, and you will get the wattle and the gum and the whatever else coming back. So, such an important facet, isn't it? The perception.
It is.
Now, where are we going now? I've got so many questions. I have my little notes here. Now, tell me, I love your three pillars, the biochemistry, the nutrition, and emotional. We did talk about the emotional side and how much that can influence, and we tend not to think about it or think it's such a big influence, but it is. And that, again, emotion it's in the same sort of sphere as perception, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It's kind of the same thing.
It is. It's sort of what I'm talking about. It's just I think a lot of people connect with the idea that they eat emotionally, but perception is very much tied up in that.
What is your... So I want to get back to hormones, because one of your big things, we have talked about it, and men and women, different, I don't want to get into the gender debate. I'm pretty comfortable just calling men and women, because that's kind of what they are.
Yes.
Biologically, let's stick to that one.
Yes.
So we have different hormonal function.
Yep.
because we do different things.
Yep.
Women, like you mentioned progesterone there before. Men, I don't know, and I'm probably one of those men who don't. I don't probably appreciate the impact of hormones and how different they generally are for females versus males, and how that plays out in life. Can we talk about that for a minute?
Absolutely.
'Cause if men can understand and appreciate that a bit more, maybe that would help marriages.
Yep. And it would also help just vitality and energy and motivation.
And I want to know if men get hormonal too.
So
let's start with the girls.
Well, let's start, if we can start right at the chemistry, because we have the same chemistry to create our hormones, and then I'll talk about the differences. So the three main sex hormones for men and women are testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. We just make them in different ratios. But I also want to throw another hormone into this mix to get a big picture here, which is cortisol, which is our chronic stress hormone. Cortisol also, though, one of the good things it does inside of us, it's a really powerful anti-inflammatory. But I'll come back to that in a second. So for men and women to create our sex hormones, the beginning of that is cholesterol. So the body takes cholesterol, and if you can imagine a river flowing, so you've got cholesterol here at this part of the river, and the cholesterol flows along the river, and some of the cholesterol remains in the river as cholesterol, but some of the cholesterol gets converted into a big stupid word called pregnenolone. And then pregnenolone, so now we've got cholesterol and pregnenolone in the river, and they're all still flowing. Some of that pregnenolone then gets converted into progesterone. So that happens in men and women. Then there's a fork in the river, and the progesterone will either go on to be converted into testosterone or estrogen or cortisol.
So this is a human function?
Yes. Men and women, humans. Yeah. Yep.
And then the proportion of which depends on
your gender and the signals coming. Yeah. So the hypothalamus in the brain is forever asking the question, am I safe? And it asks that question physically. So someone might need the doors and windows locked to feel safe, but it's also asking, am I safe? It's asking that emotionally. So, and we don't even realise it's doing it. Do we feel safe in our relationship? Do we feel safe with our finances? Do we feel safe with where our kids are located physically, or how they're doing at school, or whatever it is? So there's all these other factors that contribute to us feeling safe. So then if the message back to the hypothalamus is no, we're not safe, the hypothalamus then says to the pituitary gland, which is also in the brain, we're not safe, we need to produce some stress hormones. So it will say to that biochemical pathway I just described, the cholesterol pathway creating sex hormones, it'll say, don't prioritise the sex hormones, we need to prioritise the production of cortisol because this person's not safe, they're stressed. So in that case, this is true for both men and women. We're going cholesterol, pregnenolone, progesterone, and then instead of, for men, pushing the bulk of their progesterone to testosterone production, which is going to give them strength, vitality, libido, motivation, happiness, it's going to give them all of that. Instead of giving them bucket loads of a hormone that helps them to experience that, it's going to mostly push to cortisol. And cortisol, yes, it's an anti-inflammatory, but it breaks muscles down. It's a catabolic hormone, so you have less muscle mass. If you eat the same and move however you always have, and you've got more cortisol, your clothes are going to get tight, so we get fat around the middle. We grow a bit of a back veranda, so we kind of get back fat. Our torso thickens. It's a pretty picture, isn't it? Bit of back fat. Our torso thickens up, but that's because cortisol historically was only made when there was long-term stress, which were floods and famines and wars. And so our chemistry still operates in that way because not enough time has gone past yet in human evolution for cortisol to mean something else. And because all of the organs that keep us alive are all housed in our torso, the body's getting the message there's a famine, so they need protection and warmth and nourishment. So that's why the body will thicken you up on your torso when that's happening. But we'll do the men's example first. So think about what I've just said in that we're mostly producing cortisol from this pathway now. We're not producing very much testosterone. So that man then has the symptoms where usually what that will present with is a change in body composition. So there's more body fat, there's less muscle mass. So he has less physical strength. Testosterone's a great motivator mentally for men. So there's less motivation. So he's a lot more likely to just kind of sit around, not feel like he has any kind of purpose or contribute less, which then can change, obviously, relationship dynamics hugely, as well as his own self-esteem. Libido changes, it decreases, erections are not as robust. So there's a lot of changes that are very uncomfortable for a man. But the way we've medicalised emotions, I think, and I don't like that. So usually a man will... More and more men are seeking help, which is fantastic, but a lot of men just stay silent when they feel like this. But let's say you've got all the symptoms I've just described, which are essentially the symptoms of low testosterone, and then you couple that with all the symptoms of high cortisol I just mentioned, and you toddle off to the doctor and say, mate, this is how I'm feeling. What do you think a doctor's going to do for that person? What will that be prescribed to that person? An antidepressant.
Yeah, pops and pills.
And that's not... That won't make the person feel any better. So then men usually run a story of, I'm a failure, even the medicine doesn't work. So, and then they feel helpless and hopeless, like they can't ever feel any different. They can't ever feel any better. But it's the solution doesn't fit what's causing that biochemically. So if we can understand that, we need more testosterone for this man and less cortisol for him to then get his quality of life back. And all of that's entirely possible. And I think a lot of people think stress is just how life is now, but it's not. I wrote a book in 2019 called The Invisible Load to help people get to the heart of their stress, to see there's very real and genuine stress in people's lives and in the world. However, there's a huge amount of stress we create for ourselves because of how we think, and that's the part we can change. So... And that's what I'm interested in, is always in changing the things that we can. So, and so again, that's what I mean, that when we have an experience like this, it can be a road in for us, offering so much insight about things that are otherwise invisible to us, that are otherwise unconscious to us. So that's the man scenario. The female scenario that is similar to that is let's say she's getting the message she's really stressed and that she needs to make a lot of cortisol. Her pathway will go cholesterol, pregnenolone, progesterone, and then instead of her body, so progesterone is made in a woman after ovulation, but obviously after we ovulate, it means that you can conceive. And if the body's getting the message that there's danger and that there's a potential famine, you don't want to bring a baby into a world where it's not safe and there's no food. So ovulation, the brain will say, we can't ovulate this month, we can't risk conception, because the environmental information is that it's not a good time. And so when she doesn't ovulate, she doesn't make all of that progesterone. And progesterone is a powerful anti-anxiety agent. It's an antidepressant. It's a diuretic, so it allows you to get rid of excess fluid. It's crucial for thyroid hormone function, thyroid gland function. So when we don't have enough progesterone, we feel more anxious, our mood is lower, our thyroid, we might not have a thyroid disease, but it doesn't work as well as it once did. We retain fluid, so we feel puffy and swollen and uncomfortable in our clothes, which for a lot of women translates in their mind to I feel fat, which then has a big ripple effect often in how they then look after themselves and their self-esteem. Plus, you've then got all the symptoms of high cortisol that we talked about. And if she shows up to seek help for how she's feeling, again, she's usually given some kind of antidepressant, and it doesn't address what's really going on. So it's the medicalisation of emotions, I think it's done a lot of disservice. I'm not for a second saying that there are people who need genuine help and we must have that help available to them, absolutely. But I feel that so much of our chemistry that's gone awry is not looked at in what's really driving that person to feel that way. So therefore, what would the solution be? And for a lot of men, we've got to start looking at their testosterone. We've got to start looking at what's happening with their cortisol. We've got to also look at what allows a man to produce testosterone. So one of the key nutrients in that pathway is zinc. And zinc is, these days, we only really get zinc from oysters and red meat. There's a tiny amount in egg yolk. There's a tiny amount in sunflower seeds, but the absorption of it from the seeds is compromised because of all the fibre and other substances in the seeds. So our best food sources of zinc by a country mile are organ meats, red meat and oysters. And a lot of people don't eat enough of those foods these days. They're not getting enough zinc. And it means that we literally, that river that I just described flowing, that creation of cholesterol or the transformation of cholesterol into testosterone, it just can't happen efficiently. Another little, sorry, I get a bit excited when I talk about zinc. Zinc is also needed at what's called the catalytic site and I'll explain that in a second, of an enzyme that's required for alcohol metabolism. So if you can, so the human body can't eliminate alcohol. The liver has to change it into another substance called acetaldehyde before we can get rid of it. So as soon as we have a drink that contains any kind of alcohol, it arrives at the front door of the liver, knocks on the door and says, "It's me, I'm back, your old familiar friend." And the liver says, "All right, well, come on in." And at that point, there's an enzyme required called alcohol dehydrogenase, and most enzymes in the body require their ignition, the spark that lights the spark that lights the match is a nutrient, and in this case, it's zinc. So for alcohol dehydrogenase to be produced, the body has to recruit zinc to activate that enzyme. And alcohol, if it accumulates in our blood's a poison, and we can go into a coma and die if it gets too high. So this is a huge priority for the body. So the alcohol arrives at the front door of the liver, says, "Deal with me so I can leave the body." It's got to recruit the zinc for that enzyme to work. And so a lot of people deplete themselves of zinc, even though they might eat enough of those foods, but they deplete themselves of zinc every night if they drink consistently. So and then you can see how then that's a real, if we come back to our cholesterol river, the cholesterol in the blood then starts to accumulate because it hasn't got the zinc to transform it. Then you've got all the, so you told you got high cholesterol, then people often put on medication for that, which just lowers the cholesterol in the blood, which leads you to end up with less testosterone at the end of the river as well. What a mess, Charlie.
No, that is fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I wish all blokes knew it, and it's just chemistry. But unfortunately, these days, a lot of medicine doesn't consider chemistry. It's there's a symptom and here's a medicine for it. And
because there's such a cycle, such a interrelationships between all those different substances and enzymes and hormones that you can't fix the whole thing by looking at one symptom of that and go, "Oh, if I give you more of this, it's not going to fix it," because there's so many. So what in that cycle, which makes so much sense. I can thank you for explaining that, because the relationship between, I mean, cholesterol's a whole other bag, of course, but now I understand, the association with testosterone. And so it's almost like a vicious cycle, isn't it? Like the more stress in our lives, the less testosterone we have, the less ability we have to function as males are meant to function, right?
Yep.
Let's be sort of kind of generalising about it. And then as stress goes up, a lot of people drink.
Yep.
To counter that.
Yep.
Which means they're gobbling up their zinc.
That's right.
Which means they're producing less and less testosterone, which that's just a vicious cycle.
It is, and you just feel worse and worse.
Wow. That is something I've never heard, and I think it needs to be heard now that I kind of understand it. You'll never hear that very scientific, clinical, granular explanation for such a pandemic. I'm kind of in the world, well, in the Australia, let's say, I'm not sure about the rest of the world, I'm sure it's out there, but rural men, right?
Yeah.
Rural men, I reckon there'd be 0.001% of rural men who would know. I didn't even know that till 5 minutes ago. That is fascinating. Like, why aren't we teaching that to rural men and saying, hey, it's complicated, but there's a few things that you can do which checks and balances in place in this very clinically proven kind of cycle here that you can intervene.
Yeah.
Why are we teaching that? Apart from, I appreciate the fact that there's you can pick up the phone and talk to someone about your depression or your anxiety. You can get medication, which is kind of something, a couple of stages once you've tried other things, of course, and I share your view about it has its place, but let's not go there, as plan A. There is, things like, I can meditate, or which is great too, but there's, you just don't hear the foundational function there for people to go, right, this is pretty bloody serious and I can do something about it. As opposed to the support people get. But what can a what can the farmer down the road who's suffering from anxiety and depression and stress, whose testosterone level is going to be quite low, and he's on the grog?
So it's no one wants to hear this information, but alcohol is not your friend in those moments because of the way it depletes zinc, and it is in itself a depressant. So it's a hard pill to swallow. But again, I want to meet people where they're at. So if the idea of not having it is too confronting, well, then it might be that you pick your 5 nights a week, and then after you've done 5 nights a week instead of 7, then you pick your 3 nights a week. So it could be a reduction. Or you go, I'm only drinking on weekends, I'm not drinking on school nights anymore. Or you find a way to make an adjustment that you can live with at the moment with what else is happening. You then get super focused, I think, on making sure the zinc is going in. So making sure you're eating those zinc-rich foods on a daily basis, no exceptions.
Supplements?
And then a supplement at night just before bed. So the absorption of zinc is interfered with by lots of other things. And so put it beside your toothbrush, brush your teeth, swallow a zinc capsule or tablet, and you'll absorb it a lot better. So all of that can help. And then I also think understanding that we can, in a way, learn from what the stress really is. So instead of just going, I'm just stressed, and using that as a blanket statement that we recite and thinking it's just how my life is and there's nothing I can do about it, see if you can get granular with it and see if you can catch a thought that leads you to have a stressful experience. Find out what it is. So is it literally about survival? And in farming, sometimes it will be, like life or death. Or is it that you have a story around a perception of what someone else in your communities thinks of you, or stories left over from when you were young and how you were raised, and that you don't feel like you're getting the approval of some of those people are probably dead now. So, and gosh, there's 4,000 other obviously iterations of that, but see if you can see if there's a thought process there that's not helping you, that you could become conscious of, and then start to change that. And that doesn't change the financial stress. It doesn't change, but it gives you more tools and more inner strength and less time wasted on futile thoughts that are really hurting you. So that therefore gives you a lot more energy to deal with the actual genuine stress. And more zinc that'll foster more testosterone is going to hugely help with you.
Which would be a compounding positive thing. Isn't that interesting? Like, to distill all that into, go to a mental health talk in a rural thing with men, take home, have more zinc.
Yeah. Yep.
Supplementary and or diet.
And instead of seeing cholesterol as this bad thing, understand it is the building block of all these substances that help us feel great energy and really vital and alive. And if it starts to increase in your blood, just know that that's feedback that your river's not flowing. So what do you need to get? How do you get your river flowing better? Sometimes we do need to deal with liver inflammation, because most of the cholesterol in the blood, the liver's actually made that itself. So when you have a blood test, 80% of the cholesterol in your blood, the liver's actually created that. So when it goes up, all of a sudden, okay, what's happening with my liver? Do I need to look up? But again, that's usually going to come back to alcohol again, unfortunately, and rubbish food. Junky junk. But yeah, let's look at why that cholesterol might have gone up. Let's help the river flow again, and zinc is a huge part of that.
That's gold.
That's chemistry.
Chemistry, yeah. Which again gets back to the chemistry, the biochemistry of it all. You were saying some things back there that I remember from biochemistry at uni. I did rural science at Armidale, and in the second year of 4 years, Biochem 1 and Biochem 2 were like the hardest units in that whole university, I reckon. It was hardcore.
Oh, biochemistry was so hard to learn at university. And then when you see it in action, when you actually see it in humans, for me, in animals probably for you, and you see blood tests coming back with changes just because you've adjusted nutrition, it's just breathtaking. It's almost like a symphony, and the orchestra can be out of tune or playing this beautiful symphony. And that's why I can't separate biochemistry and nutrition and emotions or perceptions. You can't separate it.
No.
Anyway.
I love that. Okay, every man out there or lady who has a man, just think about zinc. Oh, my God, that's the biggest takeaway of the year. I'm also conscious of the time. It is getting on a little, and I just want to make sure I've got more questions, but there was a couple that... Oh, and you were speaking with Angelica there before, Libby, about diet neuroses. Can we talk about that? And then I've got another question for you, which will wrap up this bit. And then I want to have a quick break, and then I have a 10-minute little Q&A, really quick one, which is for our subscribers, if that's cool. And we'll make sure you get on your way to Crookle without any dramas. Can we talk about diet neuroses, like sort of what it is and what that means for people?
Yeah, so I think when you might start to take care of your health and you might start to play with what you eat, and I think this is especially true for young women, and they think they're looking after their health, but they're often trying to look better, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that for a second, but they frame their dietary concerns or their dedication to looking after their food intake that on the surface they're saying it's all for my health, but it's so extreme, it's actually fear. So they're pursuing perfection, and the pursuit of perfection is often a fear. It's often fear-driven, and there's no health when we're that frightened. So you often, as a young woman, don't want to admit it, I don't think. It can be hard to see that it really is fear that's leading you to restrict your food in such a significant way. You think, as I said, that you're doing it for your health, and it often takes a health crisis for you to see that is not actually working for me. I'm under-eating and over-exercising, or I've cut out all these food groups, or I'm severely iron and B12 deficient because I haven't eaten meat for the last 4 years, whatever it is. And so it begins as a care for your health, and then it takes an experience usually before you see that it was fear and almost like a neurotic sort of approach almost. And I think some women get addicted to that restriction, and then freedom lies on the other side of that, freedom from food. And I think it's really good to have standards and to care about where your food comes from, but I don't know if rules are super helpful to a lot of people, women in particular, who've come from that real dieting mentality. So I think it's really healthy to choose nourishing food and focus on the nourishment of everything, not just food though, of your environment, of your thoughts. You move because you want to use your body and appreciate your body and say thanks for your body that works, rather than punish yourself because you just ate a chocolate milk or something.
Who has chocolate milk? So it can be totally counterproductive, can't it? You get caught up in that.
Yeah. And I think it masks itself as a pursuit of health, and it can be hard to see in the beginning that it's not actually that. So that's probably more something for, I think, young people to tune into, certainly parents to watch out for in children.
And tell me, Libby, what about, where do people find you? What? Because I know you do speaking. You've got your Crookle today. What else? People want to find you. Where do they find you? What will they find when they find you there? I know you've got quite a few people on your team so you've got quite a breadth of services and so on. Like, you want to tell people how they
thanks,
get to
Charlie.
know about your stuff.
Thank you. My website is drlibby.com, so Dr. Libby, and the doctor's there not because I'm a medical doctor. I have a PhD in biochemistry.
You've got to say better doctor than most, I know.
Just a thinker, Charlie, that's all. drlibby.com is my website. I have online courses. I've written 13 books. I'm currently writing my 14th one at the moment. I absolutely love speaking. It's a privilege to speak all over the world, and I feel really lucky that I get to do that. And I also have a supplement company called BioBlends, and it's all made from food. So there's nothing synthetic in it. The nutrients aren't made in a laboratory. They're from food and from herbs. And that website's bioblends.com.
Awesome. And we're going to wrap it up now, Libby, and I'm going to ask you some questions like, I'm just baiting people to tune into the next one. You're going to tell us what your genius is. So I'm actually giving you a bit of warning. What your genius is. What you're excited about, what pisses you off,
Great.
Who are your mentors, favourite books. So if you want to know more about that, you'll have to tune in. I'm not sure quite how we're going to frame this up. Michelle helped me here. I know Michelle's in the house somewhere. She's come over from Canberra. But these tidbits are going to be for those who subscribe and become part of our community. Libby, that was fascinating. I knew it would be, and I'm so pleased we've done this here, because I was trying to work out when can I get to Tasmania, and when are you going to be up north back in sort of Northern Rivers, Queensland. But this has worked out a treat.
Hasn't it? I'm so grateful, Charlie. Thank you.
And we'll have a little break, have a glass of water. I need to go and drain the spuds.
Okay.
And I'll see you on the other side.
Look forward to it.
This podcast is produced by Rhys Jones at Jaeger Media. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to subscribe, share, rate and review. For more episode information, please head over to www.charliearnott.com.au.